I've been taking a break from long stories for a bit and listening to some short stories. So today I'm going to be introducing an anthology collection that I just finished called Fools in Love. So, like the title suggests, this was a short story collection featuring teenage romance stories, and there were a variety of different settings. So there were fantasy stories, science fiction, a few stories that were set to more modern day, superhero stories, basically that kind of thing. A lot of different types. Though all of these stories kind of shared an overarching theme related to people, I guess, trying to figure out their relationships with other people, and then also this idea of the misunderstandings that can arise when you make assumptions about what other people might or might not think about you. So I don't mean this in like a really stressful way, like there are some novels that I really don't like where a lot of the problems all come from the misunderstandings that happen when people like don't talk to each other. But this is more like the kind where people make assumptions about, oh, like so and so can't possibly like me and stuff like that. I think I've mentioned before that I don't always have a lot of patience for that kind of thinking, I suppose. But for short stories, it's really not so bad. Since they're short, there's only so much time you can spend on this kind of agonizing. So in that respect, I do think it was overall a pretty good collection. It was kind of fun because of the variety in backgrounds, and overall, like, none of it was particularly stressful, and I think I only skipped about like 2 stories. So what I thought I would do was introduce a few of the stories that I liked most. So the first one would be 5 Stars by Amy Spalding. This one was kind of funny and kind of embarrassing. So basically, the main character, Krista, only just moved to LA a few days ago, and she borrowed her father's car to attend a talent show. Her father is a rider driver, so think a service that's a little bit like Uber. And someone, like while she's leaving the event, just sort of randomly gets into her car, and she thinks she's being carjacked at first, but then it turns out that it's actually someone who mistook her car for their rider driver. And she's so relieved when she recognizes this person that she I guess forgets to tell them that she's not their ride and ends up driving them to their destination anyway. Only it turns out that this person is actually a girl from her class that she really likes, and it creates this really awkward situation because like she kind of is building a good relationship with this person through their conversation, and she kind of wants her number, but because she neglected to tell them some pretty important information at the beginning, she feels like she might seem like some, crazy kidnapper. And anyways, like the whole thing is a little embarrassing, but overall, like also really funny. To me, anyway. So that story was written in first person. The second story I talked about is called Unfortunately, Blobs Do Not Eat Snacks by Rebecca Kim Wells. This story is written in third person, and like, I know the title sounds a bit weird, and the story itself was also a little bit weird that way. So it was on 2 mages who are taking their graduation exams together, and they've had a pretty rocky relationship from like their beginning of school times, but I think it also seems like they both respect like certain qualities about each other, and as they like take this exam, a lot of these, past turmoils and stuff get pulled up, but also their exam turns out to be a lot tougher than they were expecting, since they get to the town where their exam is supposed to take place and discover that the entire town has disappeared. It's maybe not quite as serious as it sounds because the whole thing's written in a much more lighthearted way, like kind of implied by the title, but the whole thing was, kind of fun, I think, and not very stressful. The third story is My Best Friend's Girl by Sarah Farazan. This was written in first person. I will say that I don't typically like stories that have things like love triangles, but I think this one handled it okay, and it was a superhero setting, so it had a lot of humor related to the fact that So the main character, I think her name's Aaliyah, has to cover a lot for her best friend because he developed superpowers and is sort of just burgeoning as a superhero. So when he has to like rush off to save people and stuff, like she often has to make excuses for him to his girlfriend, whom she also kind of likes. And she ends up covering for him like to the extent where he can't take his girlfriend to a dance, so she's forced to show up in his stead and take her there. So the whole thing like has I guess it has a lot of humor related to the heroing business, but it also handles, I think, the relationships really well, because even though there is some of that stress where like different people like the same person and so on, like it also acknowledges the fact that I guess friendships are really valuable, and that sometimes, just because you love someone doesn't mean they love you in return, and you kind of have to let them go if it doesn't work out. And in general, like it doesn't really handle like the love triangle business in a way that was painful for me to read. So yeah, I like that one too. So lastly, my favorite story was probably Teed Up by Gloria Chow. So this one's based on a golfer. So she's attending a pre-professional tournament and she's dealing with a lot of pressure. So like pressure from the fact that she's sort of representing women in a sport that's traditionally dominated by men, and also pressure from her family who have like really high expectations for her and have made a lot of sacrifices on her behalf so that she can get to where she is. And she's had some, I guess, really bad relationships with other people. Like it's hard for her to make friends or to like build more romantic relationships because people often want to try to take advantage of her, since I guess many people don't like the fact that she's a really good girl in a sport that's mostly I guess been done by men. But at this tournament she ends up meeting this boy who's actually like a huge fan of hers and who's also just personally genuinely excited at being a part of this tournament. And I think like through the relationship with him, she's sort of rediscovering like how she fell in love with golf in the first place, like sort of finding her passion again, but also sort of rethinking like what she wants to do with her future. So overall, like this was probably my favorite because I think the pair was the most sweet, and a lot of its angsting wasn't really about the pair. Like it was more focused on like the pressures of the life that she's in, and the romance line was more about how she walked out of it. So yeah, that was probably my favorite one. So those were the stories that I liked most from the collection.